Hey guys, my name is Benjamin Hunt, and I work with Diversified, leading lighting and scenic design for the House of Worship Group. Excited to be here with you today, talking a little bit about creating/designing compelling visual environments, lighting and scenic design in a video-driven world, especially important in this post-COVID world that we're living in. A little bit about myself. I have been a worship leader. I've been a large church lighting director. I've been a small church service programming director. I've been a creative director and producer. And all the while, I've been a lighting and scenic design consultant. So I feel like I have unique perspective having sat in so many seats and from a creative world and a technical world. I feel like I'm able to sort of bridge the gap a little bit between those two disciplines. What I do specifically for Diversified, I'm usually one of the first people to touch a project from a design perspective, and I'm also one of the last people from a training perspective when it comes to lighting. So this is where we typically start. It's a SketchUp concept, and then we bring it to life a little bit through some 3D rendering, all the way through installation, integration, and training as well. Just a little bit about what this conversation is not. I'm not really going to be talking much about basic lighting hardware, fixtures, lighting system typology. There are so many resources out there, especially YouTube, that can help you dive into some of the basics, whether it be 3-pin, 5-pin DMX, or stage pin, or Sockapex, or all of these connections that we work with on a daily basis. There's just a lot of stuff out there. And so instead of focusing more on the what and on the tools, I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on the why and then approaching it more from a creative perspective rather than a technical perspective. This conversation is going to be a lot of the key principles for engaging visual environments, design building blocks, lighting for video environments. Specifically, we're going to dive a little bit into color temperature and correction because it's so important to your end product. And honestly, video is only going to look as good as the light that's hitting them. It's just the way things are. Sorry, video guys. I wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse into my toolbox. These are the things that I use every single day, or at least every week, depending on what the project is. SketchUp is huge for us if you haven't used it. There are free versions out there. We use the Pro one just because it has some more CAD integration as well as the ability to use some camera tools. WYSIWYG allows me to take SketchUp, import it into a 3D environment, and then use real-time lighting interface with the console to create looks. So I can program that when I'm not in the room. Pretty cool, as well as present to clients and to other people my vision for what that look actually looks like with light coming out of those little boxes in SketchUp. Vectorworks is what I use for 2D plotting. You can do some of the same things that WYSIWYG does within Vectorworks. These are just the workflows that I'm sort of used to. And you'll notice a lot of what I'm talking about today is probably preferential as it comes to, there are other products and other tools that will do some of the same things that I do using things like WYSIWYG and Vectorworks. However, these are just the things that I've found to be the best for my workflow, especially when it comes from a creative standpoint. I love, and I know it's a little weird to put a mouse on my creative toolkit, but this 3D connection mouse is awesome. It's like having a cable cam attached to my hand to be able to zoom through and see SketchUp, WYSIWYG, any of that stuff, and be able to have real-time control over the camera. Usually I have a mouse in one hand and the 3D mouse in the other, and I'm able to really just navigate a virtual environment in a way more, it's just way easier to get there versus having to use a mouse to fly around and control and zoom in and everything like that. Sekonic light meter and Sekonic C700 color meter. Color meter is super important, especially in this LED world that we live in, as we navigate how to light, especially for video. Video needs to know what color temp we're sending it in order for it to look right. So color temp meter, very, very important. This is just a view of SketchUp. I showed you a little bit of it earlier. If you've never seen it before, welcome to SketchUp, but I'm not going to spend much time on here, but look it up by Trimble. It's a pretty cool tool for being able to get quick designs down. It doesn't have some of the exactness of a CAD type software, but it's really cool for being able to drag and drop around things in 3D to see what they look like and to test things pretty quickly. From there, I pull things into WYSIWYG. Actually, what you're looking at here is MA2D or MA3D. Sorry, I'll go back to that. MA3D, which is a free software, comes with MA, but we've since shifted into WYSIWYG because of the fact that we can be console agnostic. So it doesn't matter what console you're on, I can go ahead and create a look and then control it from that console. So it's super important for us to be able to get the look and feel down before we ever get into a plotting stage. Some of the key principles of lighting design that we're going to talk about today are focus, intensity, color, depth and dimension, and layers. Specifically about focus, these are things, again, you can get this anywhere out on the internet. Search 3-point lighting, search 2-point lighting. You're going to see a bunch of diagrams exactly like I've drawn here, but they really are the building blocks for how we set up our lighting designs, especially when we're talking about creating a good key light situation or a good speaker light situation. 3-point lighting, 2-point lighting. It's good to know the rules so you can know that you're breaking them on purpose. There's a lot of times that I don't fall into these buckets, but I usually do it really intentionally and trying to create a particular look. But so we'll start off first with 3-point lighting. 3-point lighting usually is, and I'm not sure if you can see my mouse right here, but, and I'm assuming you can't, but you usually have a key light and a fill light. In stage light, it's typically that we have 2 keys. That fill light is typically the same intensity as your key light, so they operate really as 2 key lights, both at 45 degrees to the subject or to the person on stage, and then you'll see that it's 45 degrees vertical as well for the optimal placement. That backlight is a little bit steeper at 30 degrees over my shoulder, but 90 degrees behind. So again, if you're a video guy and you are looking at this and going, oh, that's not at all how I do it, there are some differences based on where we are wanting the subject to look. So typically, worship leader, a pastor, whoever is going to be staring straight ahead. So being able to light from these directions really smooth everything out. What you'll notice, though, is that that's used a lot in broadcast settings where we're trying to really flatten everything out. We want to create dimension, but we're not wanting a ton of shadow. We're wanting it pretty smooth and to look good as we move from left to right. That's typically how we used to do things, but now most of the setup for worship has shifted towards a 2-point lighting setup. So you have a source at 90 degrees in the front, source at 90 degrees in the back. The front source is at 45. The back source would be at 30. And you're really going to play with intensity to create the depth and dimension that you want. You're going to get a lot more shadow on the side here, but it's going to create a lot more depth to the image than by having the 2 at 45. We also, when we come into speaker setting, we run into the need for uplight a lot, because even though we have those 2 45s, we run into pastors all the time, or worship leaders, whoever it may be, that their brows are heavier, or they may like to walk really close up front to the stage, whatever that may be. But for us to have uplighting, typically we're doing that with LED tape now. It's just super smooth, super clean, can fit it into a very small lip. We used to have to do this with troughs. So we would build a trough and put strip lights in it. or put strip lights on the front of the stage. Now we can do most of this with LED tape, and there's very high CRI or color render index LED tapes available now. So there's a lot of possibilities from that standpoint, and it's easier to retrofit, but we do run into uplighting quite a bit as a need. Here's a typical stage wash. So you can see pastors in the middle. We have 4 Lecos on each side of the pastor from the front. Those are creating 4 2-point zones so that he can walk sort of anywhere within those zones, and hopefully it's smooth. So we're going to do that by whatever lensing we're doing to make sure that we're wide enough. Those are going to be able to be smooth enough when they walk back and forth. Hopefully we have a fixture that might have zoom to it. But you see that 2-point lighting displayed from a sort of macro level where we have 8 lights creating 4 2-point light zones. I've drawn in 6 backlights here at 90 degrees. You could do 4. It just really depends on how wide you're trying to do that stage wash. And I've drawn in a couple Lecos over 90 degrees off to the side to show how we might do side light. That could also be shifted a little bit out towards the front of the house, but trying to get a little bit of color into those shadows. Again, this is a speaker type setup. We're not wanting a ton of moodiness, but again, that's sort of the base. Maybe we are wanting a moody look, and we can do that in other ways as well. The cool part about this setup to me is that for probably the last 5 years, I haven't really done this in a church. Most of the time, we've done 100% moving light setups. Again, that's not necessarily the hard and fast rule, but I would say 95% of what we've done have been moving light only. So here you see a layout with, you have moving lights, 7 moving lights instead of 8. Mostly that's due to overall brightness, as well as the ability for them to zoom. So I don't need as many. I don't typically use the center light for speakers, so I'm only really dependent on 6 lights. And then for backlight, I have 5 lights. Now that's going to be dependent on how many worship leaders you have or how many frontline vocalists you have. But the biggest benefit of this is that you can have both worship looks, 90 degree front straight looks, as well as speaker looks, so 45, 45, 2-point lighting or 3-point lighting. You can have both of those from the same fixture. So it greatly reduces the amount of fixtures that you need. And it also, it gives you more bang for the buck, because for what you could only do 1 fixture, and every time that somebody moves, you're gonna have to get up in a lift and go move it or drop it with motors, whatever that may be, you can just from the console move it over and knock out that special. I would say that we were sort of on the bleeding edge of that. So color temp has come a long way as far as how well things are rendering for video. But even then, we were able to get a pretty good color temp from an RGBW front light. For our front light, we'll either use a variable white or we'll use a RGBW. And then for everything else, RGB or RGBW is fine. Focus, this is super important. And it's really comes down to taste and how your church is set up as far as style goes. But I like to keep my whitewash to a minimum. That allows color to fill in the gaps on the stage. It allows the background to pop more. We're not just blasting the whole stage with white light and then trying to throw color on top of it, because it's never going to overpower that white light. So trying to keep those pools, especially for worship leaders, as tight as possible. And yes, that means telling your worship leaders where to stand, which I know is the hardest thing. They come in, especially with volunteers, wanting to stand wherever on a weekly basis. So a lot of times that does mean spiking them. Obviously, that doesn't work for all types of church and all formats, but for us, that's where we sort of start. And then I love to use fixtures with zoom whenever possible. So especially if it's a moving head, if I can zoom from 12 to 40, that's awesome because it gives me the ability to zoom in nice and tight for a worship leader, zoom in nice and wide, zoom out nice and wide for speaker setting, and both things can handle the same out of the same fixture. HD video requires a lot less light than SD video. So my typical key light goal is between 35 and 40-foot candles for speaker wash. That may sound a little high to you, a little low to you. Again, it mostly comes down to what the camera needs. So different cameras are going to need different amount of light, especially when you had talked about box lenses or cinema lenses or whatever that may be. It's really going to come down to what your particular setup needs. But 35 to 40-foot candles are good for a speaker wash. It's going to be less than that for worship, so that background can really pop. I'm going to lower the key light intensity, like I said, to allow the background to pop. And I'm going to be careful about color intensity, especially with blue. Blue is going to blow out like crazy at 100%. Sometimes that's awesome. Sometimes that's what we're looking for. But especially in skin tone, I will either shift a little bit away from the dark UV blue that a lot of these manufacturers are putting in lights now, or I'll just dial back the intensity, or I'll just shift it off with them so it's lighting more of the stage, lighting through haze versus actually lighting on jaw, because otherwise they're just going to turn all purple. Color is sort of the next part of this. So when I started, one of the greatest gifts that somebody ever gave me was a analog color wheel. I think they went to Hobby Lobby or somewhere and just grabbed a color wheel and handed it to me. But it was awesome as far as really thinking through what our complementary, adjacent, and tertiary colors are. So as we think about setup, for this verse part, I may want to do something more of an adjacent color scheme. Blue with a shift darker or a shift lighter towards blue green or towards blue violet. And then when we get into the chorus, I want to go blue orange to really create a lot of energy, because those complementary colors are going to create more energy, and the adjacent colors are going to sort of create texture and dimension, but not as much energy as it would go into one of those complementary colors. My general rule from a programming standpoint is 2 colors plus white per cue. It keeps me focused. It means that I don't have a rainbow of color all over the stage unless I'm doing a Coldplay song, because then I'm going to have to do rainbow. But really the ability to focus down and keep things clean and organized as far as our look and feel, so that things just don't feel messy. Because when you're in an audience and you see one color scheme and then it jumps to another color scheme and another color scheme all in the same song, it can be really jarring. Honestly, emotionally, it can be jarring, even if you don't know, if you don't feel that. Being able to have these colors that go along with the vibe of what we're trying to do with the song really does help with the look and feel and just ambiance in the room. And then this is a personal preference. People do it differently all the time, but I love for lighting to determine and dictate video choices. What I mean by that is I don't typically let, in my environments that I'm running lights or programming, I don't let the video determine what the color is on the stage. And that is not necessarily a hard and fast rule, especially as we get into LED, where the LED surface is so big on the back of the stage that it's driving so much of the feel. But I don't want to base, my full stage look and feel on a 16:9 screen in the center of the stage. I would much rather choose the correct color vibe for the room, for the stage, and then choose a video that complements that. Again, that's just a workflow thing, but it's how I work. Depth and dimension. I love working in small rooms, unique rooms, rooms that are not just a black box. Black boxes are awesome because they open you up to anything, but each space is unique, so use it. Maximize the height and depth of the space as much as you can. In smaller spaces, force perspective with the materials that you choose. So maybe if it's incandescent bulbs, you're using bigger bulbs and then smaller bulbs as you get down, trying to really create that depth. A recent set that I did, I actually put 2-way mirrors at the back of the stage because the stage was so shallow that I had bulbs and pixels in front of it and was able to really force that depth to go back as much as possible to sort of trick camera and eye into thinking that the stage was deeper than it was. And then I love using differing intensities to create texture. A couple looks at that. So this is a rendering for a recent client. Their stage is relatively shallow, but they have a ton of trim height. So one of the things that we did with this set was try to use all the trim height and actually come out into the audience with these pixels. They had a bunch of epics, so that we already had a tool that they had. So it was really reutilizing that. And so you see this with an incandescent tube upstage, and then you see how we sort of build in this depth. So we have a big soft box that we created with LED above it, so that sort of create that modern look up top, but not go all the way there where you just have a solid white sheet. You still have the texture down below for camera, and it looks really great. And you get this nice diffusion. You have these bowls that have LED, that have incandescents in them. So you're starting to get this LED with incandescent vibe going on. And then as you sort of turn around to the side, you see how much creating that height and depth there really brings everything out into the room and creates a much bigger space than if we just stayed about where those, purple washes are, as sort of our downstage spot for scenic. And then also being able to have a side light option here, really, again, just giving you depth and dimension to these small spaces. In a studio world, it sort of works in the same way. So this is a set that I built for ESPN for Marty and McGee, and very, very small space. We had a 20 by 24 ballroom. This was during SEC media days. And so everything had to be done in this very, very small space. But we really need to still be able to create depth and dimension. So you'll see this, and you'll see that they have a back, it's sort of a elongated box. But when you come over here from this angle, you can see how with the color choices that we picked, as well as this sort of slashed gobo that is out of focus, we're able to create a lot of depth on that stage in a very small amount of space. And camera, especially with a shallow depth of field, was able to blur all that stuff out. It looked awesome. Layers. This is my favorite part of design. The biggest thing with layers is building an inventory that allows you to have visual diversity. I'll show you a little bit of what that means, but you want to be able to get to a point where you don't feel like you have to use everything all the time, and that you can intentionally create looks with smaller fixture groupings. So what this means is, so here's a stage that we've been working on. So you have a floor wash here, front light on all your singers, and we're able to create a really warm, incandescent look from this layout here. And then by adding color to that, but also bringing in washes above the stage, it creates a completely different vibe with the same fixtures. So here's another look at that same stage. We just turned off both fixture groups that we're using before, and now the spots are on. So you just have spots here. Again, now we've created 3 completely different looks with the same rig. And we start adding that in. So here are the washes and spots and floor all together. And then we still have a couple elements here that we haven't even seen yet. So we could have gone 6 months as a church and just been in this world, and it would have looked great. But then we start adding in these washes that are on U-torms. If you don't know what a U-torm is, you can look it up. I love them. It allows you to get vertical height on your upstage. You can put them sort of anywhere, but they're just modular U-shaped trusses. But we have these washes on U-torms, again, creating depth and dimension back there. And then there are those same washes, but in an up look. So again, we're just going through, and then this is probably my favorite thing as far as a cheap, affordable church thing, is this fixture, these batten fixtures that allow pixel mapping. So we're running these really low, just out, creating that incandescent bulb look with the spots. But then we're able to go full blast and create some really rock and roll looks really quickly Again, not every church is going to go there. Not every church wants to go there, but the ability that we were able to very quickly go from a normal, spot wash look to that rock and roll ACL look is pretty awesome. And you may say, hey, that's a big church. They have a lot of fixtures. Well, here's a smaller building that we did not too long ago that used a lot of the church's fixtures that they already had. So these pars that are in the background that are shining up and down are lights that they already had. We basically just added some moving washes and some moving battens to the layout. So here you have a pretty cool incandescent up look. All the backlights are incandescent, and you have these salmon fingers going out. But then you have the battens again, and you're able to create more point sources of light. Completely different look, and you're not having to use everything all the time. And then here you can see where they are using everything to create, a big point of a song. Layers are one of the biggest things for me as we're building a rig, that I don't want to segment a rig, so I'd much rather have a good amount of washes and a good amount of spots and before we get into those like other fixtures. But it's just a really great tool for being able to make things last longer and really decrease your workload as far as like having to change things out to make it feel fresh. You can create a lot of cool looks by just sitting on a certain amount of fixtures for a certain amount of time. And so I know we've talked a lot about lighting and video as a whole, but really to just dive in just a little bit deeper, color temp is so important because 2700 feels great in a room. It's super warm, super inviting. 5600 is what we use a lot on like movie sets. It looks amazing on video. It renders color perfectly. So the question is, who wins out? Because 5600 makes people look like ghosts on stage, at least if you're in the room. And 2700 looks super dull on video for the most part because you're pulling out so much red from a camera. Well, my preference is sort of to split the middle. So I try to go for 4200 from a key lights perspective, 4900 from a backlight, and shift colder when I'm in video environments. So if I need to go a little bit colder for key light, that's great. But the goal is to get as close to that daylight blue as possible, because if we're in that 2700 range and we say that, hey, this 2700 tungsten light, this orangey light is white, it's going to pull out red out of everything. So it's going to make all of our videos just blue everywhere. None of our color is going to render appropriately. So being able to color balance closer to that 5600, in this instance 4200, helps to those purples and those pinks to really still pop out on video and not just everything be blue when you go back and look at your capture. And super important, color correction should be metered, and cameras white balance on a regular basis. You'll have, I'm sure you can guess, but so many clients, when I walk into their room, they haven't white balanced their cameras in who knows how long. And so everything's drifted. Bulbs have aged, so everything's shifted. I know that color meters are expensive and they don't fit into everybody's budget, but just like lenses and camera bodies, you can get them from lensrental.com or any of those lens rental companies. And even if you just invested a couple days in making sure that your color balance was good every once in a while, it would be a big benefit to how video looks, how lighting looks specifically for video. Here's some just options. I know we've been talking about stage, but so many of us are living in studios now. So some just ideas, some additions, alternatives for that. Shoot into a corner to increase depth. So instead of shooting against a flat wall, just turn 45 so that you can shoot into that corner. Use soft boxes instead of Lecos, just really smooth everything out. Again, video guys are going to say, well, duh, of course I do that. But then mix in, LED fluorescent tubes and other small source elements to create that dimension and bokeh in the background for camera. Typically, when we go into these studio environments, we're doing more cinema-based shoots. So we're using DSLRs. We're not doing more broadcast. So your depth of field is going to be way shallower. You're going to be able to get a lot more depth of field. and create a lot more dimension there. And this is where I come back to the Marty McGee thing. So you see that we sort of have this elongated square that we were shooting into, 2-point lighting on each of the talent and the coach or the player. But then we're really shooting into these corners. Again, that was to create as much depth as possible for the cameras. The cameras are shooting from the front edges of the stage, shooting across the stage with one camera that's sort of just a reference, dolly in the middle as they're tracking. But these close-up shots are just shooting at a 45 into these corners. So you have those incandescent bulbs in the back. You have a LED fluorescent on the floor shining up, just really giving depth and dimension to this picture in a very, very, very small space. I mean, you can see where that air wall is right there. And then just one more idea when it comes to this new world that we're living in: location, location, location. If you are in non-audience situations, get creative with your shoot location. Extend your stage out into your space. I mean, take up all of your space if you have it. Go shoot outside in a garden or out in the woods, or create more depth by shooting backwards. Maybe put your cameras on stage, shooting out in the room so that you can put things way back there. But do things, don't just recreate the same experience that you would in the room, because you're never going to be able to create that. So do things differently in a way that would enable you to create a different, more engaging and compelling visual than you would if people were in the room. So that's it. Excited to be able to share a little bit of my creative process with you. If you have any questions, I'm excited about taking them after this call, but thank you so much for having me, and look forward to talking to you and answering some questions. Thanks.